Good afternoon, and welcome from the heart of Amsterdam to the launch of the Global Circularity Gap Report 2023. I'm Hattie Cooper, a director at Circular Economy, the impact organisation behind today's report. Our mission: to empower businesses, cities, and nations with the practical and scalable solutions they need to put the circular economy into action. And I'm delighted to be one of your co-hosts today, along with our partners on the 6th Circularity Gap Report, Deloitte.
Hi, and I am Diewetje Ebels from Deloitte, Circularity Lead for Deloitte Netherlands. The mission of Deloitte is to make an impact that matters, and we want to help accelerate the circular economy around the world. To build a sustainable future we need, and at the speed that we need to build it, we have to work in new ways, more ambitious and more impact. This is why we are very happy to be collaborating with Circular Economy to enable actionable strategies that will improve circularity in a way that improves businesses, society, and the planet. As Hattie said, we are live from Amsterdam from our Deloitte studios. The building that we're in used to be a car garage, and a few years ago it was repurposed into offices. I cannot think of a better location to launch the 2023 Global Circularity Gap Report. Just so you know, next to an online audience, welcome everyone, we have also an audience right here in the studio. I would like to take the opportunity to guide you through the next 2 hours. What are we going to do? So what can you expect? We will be commencing with 3 plenary discussions, sharing perspectives from both the private and the public sector, and also hearing from the specialists at Circular Economy about the key insights from this year's report. We then will be progressing to an interactive panel, where we will continue to deep dive on the themes that we've discussed. We really welcome your comments and your questions for the panel, but so you can put them in the chat, and then our team will hopefully answer them, or we will put them to our panelists.
As Dee mentioned, over the next 2 hours, we're going to hear from policymakers, from industry leaders, from change makers, and from the authors of the Circularity Gap Report themselves, as they seek to answer one fundamental question. Through a circular economy, are we able to fulfill the needs of our society within the boundaries of our planet, whilst also undoing much of the damage we have already caused? The Global Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative was born at Circular Economy in 2018 to tackle this very question. Our goal? To provide a measurement framework that generates the evidence-based insights that decision makers need to put the circular economy into action. Today, of course, we're delighted to be collaborating with Deloitte for the 6th annual report. All of us today are here, whether online or here in the studio, because we know that we're running out of time. We know that we're breaching the safe boundaries of our finite planet. We're consuming over 100 billion tons of materials annually. We are creating unprecedented environmental pressures and deepening global social inequalities through our linear take, make, waste economy. But I imagine you all know that, and that is indeed why you're here today, because you believe in the power of the circular economy, or at least you're open to be persuaded that in harnessing this transformative power, we're presented with the solutions we need to redesign our economic system, to hold true the focus of build back better, to live within the boundaries of our finite planet. Today is how we translate the insights you will hear from that report into tangible action.
Indeed, Hattie. Today is about making circularity actionable and achievable. We will be hearing from people who are at the forefront of making this circular world happen. To effectuate this change and to really realize a global circular economy, we need commitments, actions, and collaborations from the private sector, the public sector, and society all in one. And we also need them on a larger scale than that we are seeing today. Governments need to drive change via policies, but also via their own processes, for instance, in procurement. The industry needs to drive for innovation, both for products, but also business models, and also implement these at scale again. Collectively, we need to move from theory to practice. However, the starting point is not the same for everyone. Countries and businesses face different circularity challenges, and everyone will move in their own pace towards the shared global goal that we have. We need to customize and balance the actions needed to achieve circularity while also ensuring people's well-being. This is where the creation of a global measurement framework that from circular economy comes into practice. It gives us the tools and the insights for this customization and this differentiation.
So without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce Viviane Heijnen, the Minister of Environment from the Government of the Netherlands.
Good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't be with you in person today to hear about the new Circularity Gap Report, but I'm very grateful for the sneak preview I received, and I'd like to say a few words about the report's main conclusions. First, I want to say something about the importance of this report. In global terms, we've just started to transition to a circular economy. More and more policymakers, business leaders, and individuals are now seeing the advantages. Measuring progress is vital. Using identical indicators will tell us where we are now and where we should be going. And this will help us develop the right incentives. This report does an excellent job of providing one headline metric for the current state of play. It's our thermometer for circularity. So what are the report's main findings? The current Circularity Gap Report indicates that we are not doing enough. In fact, the needle is still moving in the wrong direction. The world is currently only 7.2% circular, and our progress is being impacted by rising extraction and use of materials. In the 6 years since the first Circularity Gap Report was produced, the global economy has extracted and used more materials than during the entire 20th century. Living standards for many people have improved, but we have gone beyond the safe environmental limits of our planet. Is there a way out of this downward spiral? Yes, there is. And this report offers a wide range of solutions and new directions. The authors will tell you about these solutions later today. So, how are we doing in the Netherlands? In the Netherlands, we're doing a bit better than in the world at large, but our ecological footprint is still too high. A lot more needs to be done. To speed things up, I'll be announcing a new national circular economy program later this month. One new incentive is the introduction of targets for key product groups like textile and plastics. In this way, we aim to help all the parties involved to get more of a grip on this challenge. But no country can achieve circularity alone. That's why we'll continue working with international partners such as Circular Economy to coordinate the many new initiatives. I am more motivated than ever to play my part. Tomorrow I'll be at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I'll use every opportunity I get to convince people that a circular economy is the only way forward. We have to take decisive action, and I invite you to join me in this. Let's step up our efforts together. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you an inspiring afternoon.
Well, thank you to Minister Heijnen for calling for coordinated action that transcends borders, but also for highlighting the vital importance of the metrics we need to set targets and accelerate progress towards achieving a global circular economy. So you've had a little bit of a preview into some of those numbers, but what do those numbers actually tell us? Here to give us a deep dive onto the Circularity Gap Report 2023 are two of Circular Economy's lead authors, Matthew Fraser, Head of Research and Development, and Lakshmi Hai, our editorial lead. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Also to Minister Heijnen for the great introduction. Well, as Hattie said, we really started out the Circularity Gap Reports with the humble goal of putting one metric forward to measure global circularity and to track that every year. I think since then, over the past 6 years, we've done a variety of different things that I'm very excited about since, for example, exploring different geographical strategies for different country groups, Also, the interplay of circular economy on the issue of climate change. I think this year is no different. We're definitely introducing a nice innovative topic to really build on our work.
Yep, and in the 6 years of the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative, we've always held one idea very dear, and that is that the circular economy is really a means to an end, that end being the goal of a socially just and ecologically safe space. So as Matt said, this report is definitely a big step towards answering that ultimate question.
I think when we think about resources, as we do as a team every year on these reports, it really does surprise me and really excite me just to understand the critical nature that materials have on every aspect of our lives. Obviously, materials are fundamental to develop human standards of living, from housing, nutrition, infrastructures, products, goods, services. But then when you look at the global impact of material use or perhaps misuse, there's a variety of very serious and very diverse environmental impacts that we see accumulating over the years. For example, over the past 30 years, we've lost a land area about the size of Iraq due to deforestation, and global wildlife populations have plummeted by about 70%. So this is quite a shocking impacts and really underlines the crucial nature of smart material use.
Yes, and without a doubt, the next 50 years we'll still see a few massive transformations of material use. For example, number one, the rapid development of new and emerging economies, which will vastly upgrade the general living standards around the world. And number two, the energy transition. So leaving fossil fuels behind, ideally, and moving towards renewables. This will greatly impact nearly every part of our economy, from food systems to manufacturing, mobility, and more. So that really begs the question, how can we make sure that materials can fulfill the transformations that we need to allow for a thriving society, but staying within the limits of the safe limits of the planet? So to even start to answer that question, we have to really understand, how do we currently use materials? What is our current global metabolism, and what is our relationship with materials in the global economy? So for that, it would be great to know, what do we extract? At what rate? What do we make those materials into? And how do we dispose, or what do we do with the goods at the end of their life? Well, luckily, that is really at the DNA of our Circularity Gap Report, and that's what we're going to now show you, how we have done in the past few years.
So I think one thing to understand is that we really actually look at the economy, the global economy, as sort of one big black box nested in nature, right? So we take a variety of materials from nature, whether they're forests, oceans, agricultural fields, mines, and we systematically bring them into our global economy, transform them into goods that provide a variety of social utility for people. However, at the end of their life, they are processed into waste products, whether that's emissions, dispersed materials, or solid materials. Our job is actually to really understand this green circle. To what extent can we really call our economy circular? So how is our global economy doing this year? I'd like to introduce 3 numbers. I think first is 100 billion tons. Today we consume 100 billion tons of materials every single year. And just to put that into context, over the past 6 years, we've consumed just about as much materials as the entirety of the 20th century. If we look ahead, the UN estimates that by 2060, this figure could double again, just to give you a sense of the shape of that curve. We've also calculated our circularity metric for the global economy. Unfortunately, it's headed really in the wrong direction at 7.2% circular. When we started with our Circularity Gap Report, it was 9.1% circular. So what's happening exactly? Clearly, the exponential rise in extraction plays an important role. A lot of those materials are committed to stocks, bridges, buildings, roads. But actually, when we look at what's coming out of the economy, the vast majority of materials are being lost, not being cycled. Clearly, there's a huge amount of potential for us to boost this number up in the future. I also mentioned that the economy is nested within the environment, and I think that's actually quite a critical point. The final number I'd like to present is 5 planetary boundaries. Out of the 9 planetary boundaries that currently exist, we've crossed 5 of them. This is putting immense pressure on the global ecosystems. in both oceans, land, and air. Clearly, looking at this picture, we're still very much embedded in a linear model. However, our report really investigates the solution space and actually what circular economy can do to change the situation.
Indeed. So the circular economy, how can we even begin to understand that? Well, I'd like to start with one thing, and that is that the circular economy, there is more to a circular economy than only recycling. So just remember that. We actually see here in the image that we use in the report that cycle, use again, is number 4. So it's actually even at the bottom of the hierarchy of the circular principles. Before cycling, we have number 1, to narrow. That's use less, use fewer materials in the first place. Number 2, slow, use longer, extract as much value as we can from the materials that we do use. Number 3, regenerate or make clean. So this means moving away from fossil fuels ideally and using less pollutant, less toxic materials. So these 4 principles convert into a huge range of circular solutions, massive range, but we can't talk about all of them in the report, so what we do is hone in on 16 circular solutions that are especially impactful across these 4 systems. So you have number 1, the food system, mobility and transport, consumables, the built environment. So now you might be wondering, why are these 4 systems? Well, the reason for that is twofold. Number 1, they're quite clearly pivotal for our day-to-day lives. They provide our nutrition, our shelter, for example. But importantly, they're also very, very important for, or very influential on the overshoot of the planetary boundaries that Matt has just explained. Actually, these 4 systems are the 4 that are most responsible for the overshoot. So, for example, the food system. In growing our food, transporting it around the world, we use up 50%, so half of all habitable land on the entire planet. So you might think, well, we do have 8 billion people nearly. We probably need a lot of land, but actually, the way that we use the land is quite inefficient in many ways. A huge proportion of that land, for example, is taken up by growing crops, which we then cut down and feed to livestock for meat consumption. Going at the rate that we now do that is highly unsustainable, and we will not have enough land. Greenhouse gas emissions, that's responsible for our planetary boundary of climate change. Now, all 4 of these contribute a lot to that one, but especially mobility and transport and how we literally fuel ourselves getting from A to B. The built environment, also very responsible for the climate change planetary boundary, but what might not come to the forefront of your mind when you think of construction is actually water and the amount of pressure or stress it puts on our global water reserves. Lastly, we have manufacturing and consumables. So again, like the food system, it uses a huge amount of land, which really drives a lot of deforestation and biodiversity loss. But what it also does is, in the linear kind of ways that we have of manufacturing our goods, is actually leach quite a lot of toxins and pollutants to our air, to our soil, and our water. So quite clearly, there's more to these systems than just material use and emissions. It's really a holistic environmental impact that it has. So the impact of our 16 solutions. Matt, could you tell us some more?
So I introduced the planetary boundaries framework, first introduced by the Stockholm Resilience Center. I actually think this is the most comprehensive way at looking at Earth's vital signs. I mentioned that we currently crossed 5 of them. What we find is actually that these 16 circular solutions, really honed in on these 4 global systems, can reverse the overshoot that we see today. Just to point out a few facts, one of the most critical, climate change. Our solutions can actually mitigate emissions down to a level where we can keep global temperatures at around 2 degrees. Furthermore, as you spoke about land and agriculture, actually shifting towards less impactful forms of protein, for example, plant-based protein, also moving towards more regenerative agricultural methods where nutrients are really returned to the soil and not leaked out into the environment, we can save massive amounts of nutrients and land use. So I think this is a really inspiring example in terms of the global impact that circular economy could have. Of course, a big part of our report is really making this real, giving tangible examples, and I think both of us will give a bit more of a sense of kind of what those really look like on the ground.
Indeed. So big findings, but what do they really mean? If we're saying that we can fulfill societal needs with 70% of the materials we now use, how will that look in different countries? I mean, we are certainly not saying that every country should be reducing their material consumption by a third. Nope. Every country has its own cultures, its own habits, and ultimately has its own current impacts on the planetary boundaries. Yes, so to better explain that, we're going to go back to we reuse some profiles that we devised in 2020, country profiles that basically take all the countries, and try and categorize them by certain characteristics. So we have 3 here, build, grow, shift, and we basically place them in where they stand in relation to the goal that I mentioned at the start, ecologically safe and socially just space. As you can see, some of them are kind of close, but generally no one's really there. So let's start with the build countries. These are countries such as Pakistan, or countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. And you can see here, they're all the way here on the left, which means they have quite a low human development index, but they also have quite a low ecological footprint, meaning they might struggle to deliver on some basic needs, be it education or healthcare, but they really contribute almost nothing, if anything, to the planetary overshoot. But of course, it's going to take some development to actually make sure that their human development index can rise. That will require materials. So it's quite likely that these countries may need to indeed invest materials in building infrastructure for hospitals, transport hubs, and more. But with a circular economy, we hope that we can hope that the ecological footprint, the environmental impact can remain somewhat low. So moving them really towards this goal. Secondly, we have the grow countries, so the orange dots. As you can see, it's quite a dynamic group. You have countries that are all the way down here and all the way up here. So what we really know about this group is that it's indeed dynamic, but it really has those countries that are currently undershooting, but will very soon step over that and begin to overshoot. So quite a crucial group of countries to engage with in the circular economy. So as we can see, some of them are very close, such as China, but generally their human development index is about in the middle. So goals here will really be stabilizing that material extraction, that environmental impact, while still building the social capital. Lastly, we have the shift countries. So that's where we are right now, the Netherlands. Many other EU member states are in this country, as well as the US, Japan, a few other countries like that. And what I think a lot of us probably know is that material consumption here is very high. Both historically and currently, these countries are basically largely responsible for the overshoot we now have. But because of maybe the investment and the amount of materials that have been used, we do also have a very, very high human development index score. So as you can see, we basically need to come down. So that really is about upholding that social capital while reducing and minimizing those environmental impacts, basically shifting away, as you can tell from the name, from more linear practices. But to make this a bit more tangible, we're going to also talk you through some actual country examples.
So actually, this is a bit of a personal example. I was recently in Africa, traveling through the southern part of Ethiopia. And actually, one thing traveling through the landscape that you really can't help but notice is the extent to which farming is really done on a small scale. It's really beautiful to behold, people on the land, very organic. However, you can also see that this is a really tangible barrier in terms of farmers' ability to expand or even just diversify their livelihoods. And of course, there's a susceptibility, especially when we consider climate change, to crop failures and a variety of other risks. 1 Acre Farms is actually a farm very close to where I was, Lake Victoria in Uganda. It's a highly profitable regenerative farm, done on a very small scale. Regenerative means that everything is closed loop by design. So the pig waste is used to grow flies, which is then used to feed chickens and fish, whose waste is put back to the land and also used for biogas. Everything has its place in a loop. And of course, multiple crops and multiple byproducts also mean multiple revenue streams. So this really helps boost farmers' revenue every month and every year, but also increases the amount of jobs and the level to which communities can be engaged. So just by embracing resource efficiency and circularity principles from the beginning, we can actually engineer social outcomes, economic outcomes, and greater economic resilience, not only for farmers, but for the community as a whole. If we jump ahead to grow countries, as Lakshmi was saying, this is a hugely dynamic group of countries, one of which is Vietnam, and the manufacturing sector is really at the beating heart of these countries. Vietnam, actually since the 1990s, has pursued a policy of investing in developing what's called eco-industrial parks. These are a cluster of industries whose really sole purpose is to design out waste and valorize byproducts, whatever they may be. I think the evidence actually for eco-industrial parks is clear. It's been around for multiple decades, hundreds of thousands of tons of physical waste, emissions, water, you name it. It can really be designed out. I think the interesting story here is actually the social one. By really focusing on resource efficiency and circular economy from the ground up, there's a massive amount of innovation, a lot of intensity of knowledge sharing, which boosts workers' knowledge, their skills, and really helps build out the competitive advantage of these companies and the skills of the workers. So I think, again, what's really inspiring here is that by embracing circular economy principles from the ground up, we can actually have beneficial effects for both economy, society, and the environment.
Now, shift countries. So as I was saying, minimizing the environmental impact while keeping the strong standard of living. So I'm going to talk about Amsterdam, where we're broadcasting from today. I think most people who either live here or visit here are in both shock and awe of how many bicycles there are and how reliant people are on their bicycles. In Amsterdam, 4 out of 10 trips are done by bicycle. I think for myself, it's nearly 10 out of 10. Really quite a shift away from my life in England anyway. But what I think it really shows as well is that we can introduce more circular solutions that seem quite simple, but they actually make our day-to-day lives better. So in Amsterdam, it's quite important to remember that it wasn't always this way. In the 1970s, it was, I've read anyway, quite a car-centric city, quite typical of a lot of major urban hubs. But it was due to public pressure and policy change that actually the plans for the urban highways were dismantled, and focus went towards making it better for cyclists to get from A to B within the city. And nowadays, there's a lot of push and a lot of investment in cycle paths between cities, meaning, again, the commuter can actually cycle between cities on their bike or their e-bike. But I think also, cars do have a future in urban mobility. It's not that we're anti-car at all. But there are certain ways that we could probably approach car use a bit better. One quite well-known circular business model is mobility as a service. And this is kind of, accepting or embracing the idea that I don't have to own it. We don't have to own our own car. We probably all know the stat that in Europe they sit unused 90% of the time. But mobility as a service models can allow you to hop on an app, rent the car, use it for when you need it, and then share it with your neighborhood. And there are quite a few benefits that will come from this beyond just not having your own car. Imagine the street you live on. Maybe you have quite a few car park spots there. I know on mine, maybe half of the street is taken up by cars that kind of sit idle for a lot of the time. But if there are fewer cars in circulation, then imagine what we can do with that space. We are running out of space, especially in this city. We can make it greener, safer for children, cleaner air. A huge amount of benefits can come from it. And for me, I really think the circular economy offers quite a lot of solutions that can make our day-to-day lives better. It's not just about future-proofing the Earth for our future generations, but also for how we live right now. And although it will entail a bit of a shift, I think it's really more important to think and be excited, not for what will change and what we might lose, but really what we will gain.
So I think obviously we've just really tried to show you a handful of examples, and there's many, many more in the report. For those in the audience, you each have a copy. For those online, you can visit circularity-gap.world/2023 and download your own copy. I think the one thing that I would want to leave you with is, really nothing here that we're talking about is science fiction. We're not basing our strategies on lab-scale technology or materials that are super expensive. All of this is really tangible stuff. So we don't need a lot of fancy things to make this happen, but what we actually do really need in a very serious way, as you see by the metric, is functional and effective collaboration between policy, between business, and you as all consumers. I think with that, really putting our focus on aligning these goals, tracking progress toward a more circular economy, we can actually make real change. And that's quite an exciting message. Obviously, as Viviane Heinen mentioned, she's taking action from the policy space, and she'll be representing the Netherlands at Davos. I would now invite you to hear a little bit more about what this looks from the business side, from the industry side. What are some of the challenges, but also what are some of the successes and inspiring stories? With that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew and Lakshmi, for the great insights into this year's report, showing both the state where we are, but also giving some nice, hopeful solutions for the future. I think for everyone, of course, the metric that does stand out here is that the world is only 7.2% circular at the moment, and that number has been decreasing. We've seen the 4 impact sectors where we really can make a huge change, and I think I'm very honored actually to introduce a person who has dedicated his personal and professional life in changing this, especially within the fashion industry. So let me introduce to you Bertus Servaas. Bertus is the owner of Vive Group and the president of Vive Textile Recycling, the biggest textile recycling company in Poland. Via his visionary and innovative approach, he has really contributed to making fashion more circular. He's going to tell us our story here. Perhaps also good to know that in addition to all of the work he's been doing with his company, he's also been an active philanthropist for years. So, Bertus, thank you and welcome to the stage.
Dear all, nice to meet you today. First information, we are 99% circular, so we do a little bit better than the 7% in the world, which is for a good thing. But to see our business case and to prove everything, I think we should go back to the start of the business, because during to the start, we are now where we are. I think that's the truth. So when I was a very young guy, I had some visions. So I have the ability to see a few years ahead. So I'm feeling what's going to happen in a few years, which is absolutely great to have. If you have that, you're a happy person. So I'm a happy person. And I never knew where I'm going to use it. I was thinking I will never go to business. Business is nothing for me. And to be honest, my first job was at the tax office. And when I was at the tax office, it's a rather funny story. I was 3 months, I was controlling firms, and the guy said to me, Bert, you have results 0. What's this? I said, yes, but these people, these businessmen are now paying taxes, and otherwise they were not here anymore. And he said, it's not working like this. And then I realized this is not my world. I have to do something else. So I went to a guy I know, Mr. Groot, and he had the firm, it's Mr. Moloch, and they did in second-hand clothing. And I asked them, I was just walking in, I said, can I work for you? Can I work with you? He said, no problem, we can do it. And this was changing my life. He learned me how to do it. He learned me everything what was necessary in life. And we did also the business of selling. So I learned and selling, and the business of second-hand clothing was very helpful for me in the future. We did business in Hungary, very nice business, but the partners were rolling her out. They were just taking everything, and then we said, okay, we have to do it ourselves. And then we went to Poland in October 91, and we started the business. We were very lucky to find 2 Dutchmen there, Mr. Vermeer and Mr. Visser. Vive is Visser and Vermeer, the names of the people, and they invested some money so we could start. And then one of my partners, he was died in a car accident, which was for us, of course, again, big trouble, a big, of course, a tragedy for us. And then also Mr. Groot went back to Holland, and I stayed with Mr. Vermeer, who was 30 years my friend, and 30 years stayed in Poland with me, with many advices. And so I always met the good people on the right time, which is, I think, very important in life. And then the first 10 years we were building up the firm. I didn't know what circular economy at that time, of course. But I had some things about, and we were sorting 100 tons and every day, and then our firm burned down. So again, I had a big problem, and I was thinking about why is this happening? And we survived due to my people. My people were helping to stand up again. I was a little bit down after the death of Bert, and then the fire, for me, it was a little bit too heavy. But my people showed what the value of people is. It's unbelievable. If you have people behind you and next to you, this is the biggest thing you can have in life, I think. This is absolutely wonderful, absolutely beautiful. And this gives me the power to start again, and my vision came back. But if you are a visionary, the biggest problem for a visionary is he's not structural. I'm not structural. I'm not building systems. I'm not building, let's say, projects and so on. But then I met my wife. My wife was at the moment 50% owner also of Vive Group, and she has everything which I don't have, and I have everything which she doesn't have. So we are perfect together. And from that time, we just going only up and up. And we came to a business which was at that time, 15 years ago, around 450 tons a day, which means around 100,000 tons a year of sorting second-hand clothing. At that time, it was around 50% wearable. So you have to think about 50% you can sell still as second-hand clothing, but of course to the countries like Africa, South America, Asian, all sorts of countries. And 20% of wipers, which you make, let's say, products to clean the machines from oil and from things. So it's more reuse and not recycle. And then this 30% was interesting my wife and me, how to do this 30%, which is thrown away on the garbage, or partways for half recycling going on. And we said we have to find a way. First, we had the alternative fuel. We made alternative fuel to the cement industry for the heatings, but this is not rather ecological. It's okay, but it's not rather ecological. And I was all the time thinking how to change this. And again, God helped me a little. We were at a dinner with some inventors from Holland, Dave Binder and Guus Vormans, and with Mr. Vermeer together, and we were just joking a little bit. And I said, why we can't make pallets from second-hand clothing? And we were laughing on, and the next day on the breakfast, Mr. Binder was coming, and he said, it's possible. But Bert, you have to know, if you want to do this, it costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of trouble, and we can't do it in half a year. It costs really a lot of troubles. I said, okay, prove me first, then we will do it, and we make a firm, and we made Vive Innovation as the firm for innovations. And first of all, he showed us this one. So he made, in a few months, this thing from second-hand clothing. He put on it, I was a skirt. This is really the first model, it's 12 years old. And I said, okay, we started. So we invested some money, Mr. Vermeer together, and then it worked and it didn't work. We invested millions, it broke down again. And all the time, and here, that was my point why I started to tell about my story, we never gave up. And I think this is the biggest message to all the firms, to all the people in the world. Never give up, go always on, and you will achieve it. How we achieved it? My wife brought into us a lady with this Bozena carcass, and Bozena made it. Because you have to understand, everything you put in is different. Second-hand clothing is everything. You can't say, I put now one trouser in, then one this, then one this. It comes like it comes. And this is the difficult part to do it. And we did it 1.5 year ago. We succeeded to get the continuous production. We make now, it's unbelievable, I can't show it today, but we make now, for example, the children places to play from second-hand clothing. We make buildings, outside of buildings. We make pallets. We make off the sea, the platforms where you can walk over the water. It's really unbelievable, and it's going to change the world. It's not yet, let's say, scale. We are trying to scale it now. We need investors. We need, of course, the European Commission and so on. But it's an unbelievable thing. I think we can do hundreds of thousands of tons we can make of these products. This is really a world invention, and it's really absolutely great to do this. After this, what we're also doing, we have around 57,000 meters of second-hand shops. So we're selling, just to give you an imagine, we're selling around 17 million pieces of second-hand clothing every year, which the people doesn't have to buy new ones. And we try to change the mentality of the people all the time. We are going to repair the clothes. We're going to remake the clothes. We have even plans to make with young people who are making fashion shows, to make fashion shows from second-hand clothing. We're going to make our own brand from, so if something is broken, we can, and it's really broken, you can still make it with your own brand. These are really beautiful things to do. And we just, I think half a year ago, we just made our program Game for Planet. Game for Planet is nothing else that we buy the clothing from the people. You know very good, I think, that you throw away your clothes now in this big containers, and then someone picks it up and the sorting. We try to do this different. We try to buy from the people the clothes, take them from their homes. They can bring them to our shops, and we just pay the people to see they have also a good thing that they get the money for it, and they don't have to do the work. We take it from the homes and so on, or they bring it to the shops. What is the future? The future is to go more in Game for Planet. So we want to have Game for Planet 99% of our sorting. This is our plans to change the mentality of the people like this, that we all think about circular economy, and we have to be aware of what we're doing. We're going also to invest in artificial intelligence. We are sure we want to be a technology firm. We don't want to be seen as a firm in second-hand clothes, and this is all dirty and all thing. We want to be a technological firm which shows that how you can change the world. And we also want, of course, to do more recycling. At the moment, we have one invention, which I can't tell you today because the competition is also listening what we're doing. But I think we will do this in half a year. It will be ready. And this is also one thing will, in our opinion, change the world. So that's absolutely great. If I look to it now, like how we can do it, how I see it, I think the regulations in the circular world is absolutely needed. It's absolutely great. But it's a must. I talk to a lot of business people, and they all say, we have to do is ESG is very important. I always say it has to come from your heart. You have to change the mentality from the people. You can earn money and do also circular things, but you have to make your inspiration. You have to be inspired. You have to change your people. That's what we did. We changed our people from the bottom. After COVID 2019, we invested a lot of money with our managers. 200 people from our 2000 were on the special schools to learn what is circular economy, how it's done. And the people on the floor, they know, then they think circular. And I think this is the point we have to change as the firms. We have to make our people inside working. And it doesn't have to be a must to change the circular economy, it has to be a want. And if you do it with ambition, with inspiration, then you will work everything out and everything will work. I give you, a lot of people say this is ideology. This is not true. When I went in 2002, I invested in a handball club in Kielce. Kielce is 180,000 people. And it's nothing. And the club was bankrupt. And the first meeting I had there, I say, we're going to win the Champions League in handball in 10 years. And we won in 2016. We won the Champions League as a small city in Poland with all the big clubs. We won from Barcelona, Paris Saint-Germain, and everyone. Why? How is this possible? This is only possible if you believe in your dreams. And I hope that every businessman in the future will believe in their dreams. Thank you very much. Maybe one small point, because I forget. Our people, when we made this change, were writing a book. This is a book written by my people on the floor. This is unbelievable. They are writing over magical dreams for the planet. And so you see, if I can change them, everyone can change everyone, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertus, for your very inspirational story. And I think together we can really dream indeed of a better world. I think your story covers it all, talking from collaboration with your wife, but also, of course, with your employees, with new partners, perseverance with product innovation, business model innovation, and, of course, also scaling what we need to achieve, in the end, a global circular economy. Indeed, with 99% circularity, I think you're way ahead of the rest, but let us use that as a great inspiration. Before we head to the panel, we have a short message from Martijn Lopez Cardozo. He's the CEO of Circular Economy. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us today because he is at Davos at the World Economic Forum.
Good afternoon, and great to see you all. I really wish I was with you. However, if you watch this, I will be in Davos presenting our Circularity Gap Report at the World Economic Forum together with our partner Deloitte. And this year's theme of the World Economic Forum is cooperation in a fragmented world. And I would agree, the world is pretty fragmented right now. We have the war ongoing still in the Ukraine. We live in a very polarized world. Polarization both within countries, but also between countries. High-income countries that consume a lot of our carbon footprint, and lower-income countries that don't use a lot of the footprint, yet face a lot of the consequences. And in the background, we see our economy slowing down and even potentially heading into a recession. So in this backdrop, I think cooperation is critical because we have to face these crises and end up in a world that's both resilient and sustainable. So how does circularity fit in? I think two things come to mind. The first one is geopolitical. If the war in Ukraine has taught us one thing, is that we cannot rely on rogue regimes like Russia to be dependent on for critical materials and energy. The second one has to do with our planetary boundaries. As the Circularity Gap Report shows, we're currently overshooting 5 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. Think about that. Circularity has a big potential to solve these problems. But at the same time, it's not easy. The number, 7.2%, is very low. And it's actually declining. We're using more than 100 billion tons of materials. I've also witnessed this on a personal level. I was a circular entrepreneur, trying to build a circular business in a very linear world. And I constantly felt that the linear machine was outpacing me, competing against an established system that was highly efficient. So what should we do? I think the good news is that this report doesn't only point out the problems, but it also shows a couple of the solutions. So it's use less or narrow, use longer, slow, make clean, regenerate, and at the end, there's also always the option to cycle. And if we apply these 4 strategies across key global systems such as food, manufacturing, mobility, and housing, we can reduce our material use by about 30%. And, most importantly, stay within our planetary boundaries. So, as you reflect on today, think about how can you apply this in your business, in your organization, in your nation, in your city, and apply these circularity strategies and help stay within the planetary boundaries. Thank you, and I'm wishing you a great afternoon.
Thank you, Martijn, and I hope he's having a great week at Davos. We're now going to commence with the final part of the live stream. We have an interactive panel discussion, and I'm very glad to see that on stage we are joined by Elisa, Tonda, and Ian Gulland. Next, of course, to Matthew and Bertus, who just gave a keynote. Elisa and Ian are 2 key experts in the field of circularity. Elisa is the Chief of the Resources and Markets Branch at the United Nations Environment Programme, and Ian is the CEO of Zero Waste Scotland. Welcome both. And just as a reminder for everyone, we have the opportunity to take your questions, so both in the room but also online. So please post your questions. Let's start with a question for you, Elisa, as you oversee the global circularity playing field. The GAP report shows that the path towards circularity differs per type of country. What circular strategies are most relevant for countries that are growing and expanding their standards of living? Oh, we cannot hear Elisa. I think there's a technical one on our end. And we're just going to check that. We still cannot hear you, just one second here. Well, perhaps we'll wait until the technology is finished. Perhaps we should first start with a question for you, Matthew. So hopefully everyone at the control room next door gets everything sorted. You have overseen 10 circularity metric reports for many countries. Are there any universal lessons you can share from all of your work there?
Yeah, great question, and actually maybe something that I can pick up from what Martijn was saying. I think what we've seen, we've obviously looked at a lot of countries in typically the global north, Europe, North America. What we've seen is actually these four sectors, these four systems that we've introduced here. So built environment, mobility, food systems, and consumables. These really give almost universally the biggest bang for our buck in terms of really boosting circularity. I think now that we've also have, let's say, a good data set of different country level data, I think it's actually reasonable to think that almost most countries that we've at least worked with could quite easily double their circularity and quite easily also take a good 30% chunk out of the materials that they consume every year. So that's really doing just as much with about 70% of the materials while also doubling the cycling. And I think that's actually something that we're seeing more and more of as we have a sort of bigger sample size of countries.
Okay, thank you. Let me check if we have the technical issues resolved. I don't think we have. Ian, can we hear you, or can you? No. Of course, we did check this before we went live, but of course, on the moment supreme, technology is failing us. Well, perhaps. Bertus, do you recognize, hearing what Matthew has to say, do you recognize any of these lessons learned which you applied or seeing in your day-to-day business?
Yes, of course. I think what Matthew said is really true, and you can see this every day, also in a normal business. For example, our composite, textile composite, we sell very good in the countries where are a lot of people thinking about ecological things, and if you come to, let's say, a normal country which is not thinking like this, they just say it's a little bit too expensive. And this is the thing we also try to do in our firm, that sometimes I try to learn my people that buying ecological things is never expensive. You just have to calculate it in your budget and to change your mind in this one. Or if you don't do it, our children, our grandchildren will have the problems. And I mean, I'm 60 years old. For me, it's... it will last my thing, but we have to think like this, I think. And the biggest thing is the mindset. If we get the mindset done, we will do everything. But if you look only to the profits and only to the business, we will never change anything.
So quite interesting what you said, and I think I've also had a couple of conversations with people indicating, yeah, but it's more expensive, but then it actually also lasts much longer. So perhaps the upfront costs are a little higher, but if
That's exactly. I mean, our composite, you never have to paint. It will not be broken. I mean, if you go in Amsterdam or wherever, you have all these sitting banks, and you see 90% have a hole or is something broken. With our composite, you will not have it. It will be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years as you bought it. I mean, I never forget, we bought one gross on a graveyard around 12 years ago. And in Poland, it can be minus 20 and plus 30. And it's standing the same as 30 years ago, as 12 years ago. It's the same cross. So, but okay, I don't want here to make a selling program, but this is not about the selling of the goods. It's about the mentality to change something. And this is what I try to do, and this is what I try to inspire the whole business. Because if you really think about business, everyone can find points that they still earn the money, which also necessary. I mean, if they don't earn the money, it's you can't make it only a story about ecology. But we can do a lot more, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think I'm getting a new message here, but I think we're trying still with the technology. I think it's still not working. So I'm hoping someone give me a thumbs up, because I'm getting someone trying to lip read something to me. I'm not that good at it. So we do have a question from the online audience, and I think Matthew, your help in this. Can you shed some light on some of the circularity strategies mentioned within the construction sector?
Well, actually, it's a great question. We just completed our first ever Circularity Gap Report specifically for the built environment right here in the Netherlands. I think, maybe even just picking up on the 4 strategies that we presented in our main presentation. I think regenerate really stands out, moving towards wood. In many cases, biomass can be carbon neutral, not only looking at wood, but things like hemp or even agricultural residues. To the extent that we can substitute those materials instead of things like concrete and steel, which are incredibly energy intensive, that's an obvious win. I think also, actually, a good example that you brought up was reusing what you already have. So this was an old garage from the past decades, and I think beautifully really made over to a very high value asset in a very beautiful location in Amsterdam. I think actually this is really one of the key strategies for shift countries, as we presented, is we have a lot already. There's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of assets that really just need some attention and care, not much more than that. And I think really applying that kind of thinking in terms of what already exists rather than reinventing from the ground up actually can go a long way.
Yeah. And of course, that can actually create some tension if you're running a business. If you want to move to a circular economy, it's not just the circular part which is important, but also the economy part is important. How to make sure that you keep a business which is affluent, and you can support all the employees that work for you. So there's a good balance to be found there, of course. Just one note, so we're trying to dial Elisa and Ian back in, so hopefully that will work, because I'm actually very curious to hear what they have to say, given their experience. And now I'm hearing an echo. I think that was one of the technology issues that we hadn't had yet today, so probably I'm on mute is the next one. I do see a bit of a smile from our sound technician here, so I'm guessing, followed by a little bit of a handshake. So let's just continue here. This is actually also linking to that economy part of the circular economy. Bertus, how to strengthen actually the financing? You mentioned, oh, wait, before you do that, let's check, because I see that we have Ian and Elisa back. Can we have a little bit of a trying to make some...
Yes, hello, greetings from
Hey! And it works. And I'll save the question for you, Bertus, because I'm really keen to hear now from our online panelist. So, Elisa, let's go back to the question that I started with. It's about the differentiation in the path towards circularity. What circular strategies are most relevant for countries that are growing and expanding their standard of living?
Thank you very much, Dee, and it's a pleasure to be online and be able to interact with all of you, and a good day to everybody. And Dee, I really very much like the question, because it allows me to put on the table some elements that are good consideration to be put on the table when you consider how circular economy plays out in different geographies, in different contexts, and in different economies. The first one really very much ties with what Matthew was mentioning on the opportunities that are there in the space of infrastructure and the built environment. Because what we see now is that half of the building that will be standing in 2050 has actually not been built yet. The equivalent of the city of Paris is added in floor space every 5 days, and the equivalent of Japan every year until 2060. So that gives us an incredible opportunity to think through that built environment, that infrastructure, in such a way that it is at the service of a circular system, and it does not lock us in a linear economy. The second consideration, Dee, that I wanted to bring on the table resonates a lot with what Bertus was mentioning, and I liked a lot his reference to invest in people in its earlier intervention, because for different geographies, the shift, the transition to circularity will need to be very much an inclusive one that brings in job opportunity, employment opportunities, and one that brings in a group of actors that have been fundamental in creating circularity so far, which is the informal sector. I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with the figures that reports such as Breaking the Plastic Wave are reflecting in terms of job opportunities and a new plastics economy being able to create 700,000 jobs by 2040. Or the figures that our partner agency, the International Labour Organization, is reflecting in its report that transition into circularity can create up to 100 million new jobs globally. Many of them being actually jobs that will be created in the global south, and many of these also being jobs that are created, that are associated with recycling and closing the loops opportunities. So there's definitely a space there that needs to be catered when we're looking at transition into circularity across different geographies. And as I was mentioning, it's really important to bring in the transformation to circularity also those groups that might be more vulnerable if they are not thought through explicitly in the transition to circularity. And I mentioned the informal sector as being one of these, as you know, informal sector itself has been accounting historically for something around 50 to 20% of waste collection globally. It's a group of around 2 billion people that are part of this informal economy and that need to become an active part of our transition to circularity. And the very last point I want to put on the table is very much one around recognizing that different economies will play different roles in the transition to circularity. And let us think of resource-dependent countries, resource-rich countries, and making sure that in shaping their transition to circularity, there really is an important focus being given into enabling them to capture a greater share of value of the resources that are coming from their countries and helping them in this way in diversifying their economies into emerging sectors such as recycling and renewables. And just prior to concluding, I just want to flag the fact that this is very much the focus of a number of existing initiatives on circular economy to which UNEP is very closely associated, such as the African Circular Economy Alliance that has been focusing on 5 big bets for Africa's pathway to circular economy, being these food system, packaging, electronics, fashion and textiles, and the built environment. And with a very similar approach, the same has been done by the Latin American and Caribbean Circular Economy Coalition that UNEP is coordinating in the context of its shared vision for the region, and that is really understanding the opportunity that exists in the region in the transition to circularity when focusing specifically on food system, mining and metals, constructions and plastics. Just exactly keeping in mind what you were reflecting on, what it means in different parts of the world transitioning to circularity.
Thank you, Elisa, for this very thorough answer. And I think you actually also answered a couple of questions that I saw coming from the online audience. So very insightful here. The social element, I think you mentioned a couple of times, is important. We need to make sure there is a balance between circularity and maintaining people's well-being, or actually creating people's well-being. Ian, curious to hear, of course, we just heard more about the Global South and more developing countries. You're running Zero Waste Scotland. Of course, Scotland is a bit of the opposite of that matrix, which is Lakshmi also showed earlier today. What type of strategies can you recommend or important for countries that have a large extractive industry and consume actually over double the global average?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today. So, yeah, as people might be aware, we obviously working alongside Circular Economy have just produced our own Circularity Gap Report for Scotland just before Christmas. And you're right, we're just sort of getting to grips with the fact that we're actually, as you've said, below the global average in terms of the metric. But obviously, it's not just about the measurement, it's about the opportunity through the work to identify those scenarios and those strategies that we can bring forward to close the gap. So the main thing that we're picking up on is, and others have said it, that this is really a systemic issue in terms of thinking about the whole system, and it's not, and it needs a systemic solution. So while we are obviously rightly pleased about our progress in Scotland around the circular economy in terms of our government policy, action on the ground with individual businesses, we've been working with over 250 individual companies. We've been investing in a number of those companies over the last couple of years. There's significant interest from the municipalities in Scotland on how to support those businesses. I do think we need to really, I wouldn't say change, but we need to think much broader than that this isn't just about an individual business strategy. This is an overarching economic strategy that we need to really get people to galvanise behind. So really it's about thinking about the big picture to really close that gap. It's not, with every respect, just the individual businesses that are going to do it. We do need to kind of realign our economy more generally. I also think, and I think this is a key point for us, that we probably do need to move away a little bit from the kind of sectoral lens and start to think more proactively around key products and materials that we're using in our economy around the whole supply chain. And that, I think, reinforces the point that certainly Matthew was making about tackling systems rather than specific sectors. And I think there's an important difference there between those two statements, and it is about thinking about the totality of our assets rather than just when they fall out as waste. So how do we deploy those assets in use as well? Another thing I think we are obviously very focused on, that this isn't, we obviously have an issue at the moment in terms of our current economy with regard to consumption and wastefulness at the end of life, but the real opportunity, the thing that we really do need to focus on, is thinking ahead and getting in front of the curve, designing the future around reduced and more circularity of assets around the economy, really increasing. So people have already mentioned, the deployment of net zero infrastructure is a good example. I'm sure it's the same for all other countries, whether that's wind farms, heat pumps, electric vehicles. All of that, and we all need it, of course, in terms of decarbonising our energy system, but there's a potential there to create even more negative impact, not just here in Scotland, but through resource extraction elsewhere, biodiversity loss and further societal inequality. So we really need to get in front of that curve. So I think in terms of a strategy, that the report that we've got is signalling the direction and the opportunities for us that we need to take forward.
Thank you, Ian. And let me take a moment also to see if we have any questions from people in the audience here. We've got a couple online, but also want to give people here. I think we have a microphone, but perhaps that will just add to the sound difficulties. Hopefully not. Yeah.
Hello, thanks for these explanations. I was actually wondering about the 100 billion target. Is there any target or is there like an amount of a tonnage of materials that would be sustainable? Because 100 is clearly too much because we're going out to 5 billion. But there is anything which would be sustainable?
Really good question. So I would also want to clarify that 100 is certainly not a target. It's where we are now. We're consuming roughly 100 billion tons of materials every year. in terms of actually bringing a target there, I think you do need to kind of bring in some context for what does good look like. And I think for us, actually, that would be the boundaries, the thresholds of the planetary boundaries. I think, plus or minus, there's always a little bit of room for debate. But I think what we found is circular economy strategies deployed quite boldly across these 4 systems globally could reduce the global material footprint, so that 100 billion number, by about 30%. So in other words, actually we could fulfill the same needs with 70% of the materials that we're currently doing. I think that's quite a notable finding, because we can also correlate that footprint savings actually with impact reductions across the 5 key planetary boundaries that we're currently overshooting. So I think, well, the math is quite easy for me. 70 billion tons does sound like quite a feasible target to go for.
Feasible. Hopefully you will also be able to achieve this. I think we're currently not on the right path of the exponential growth, unfortunately. Was there there's another question from the audience?
Yeah, thanks. What explains us going back from 9 to 7% circularity recently?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think it's there are multiple things happening, right? So I think clearly, as I tried to illustrate in my presentation, the volume of consumption every year is really increasing almost exponentially. The amount of what goes in, typically only about 1/5 on average comes out. So clearly there's less coming out than coming in. And a lot of that actually has to do with our contribution to stocks. So when we think about the buildings, the infrastructure, the roads, that's actually where a lot of these materials are going, and that actually provides a lot of social utility. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, when we look at what is coming out, about 70% of that is still being wasted. So the global recycling average is about 30%. Clearly, there's a huge amount of improvement there. I think if we add that all up, actually what we see is that circularity globally could double quite easily, going from 7.2 to around 16%. And that would really be assuming, we're using materials in the best way that we can, and we're cycling everything, we're really keeping everything in the system.
I think with coming back to what Elisa said, that on every day we're building, or every 5 days, I think we're building a city like Paris in buildings. So, and up until 2060, I think you mentioned, I'm guessing that the contribution to the stock will continue for quite a while. I'm actually interested. You said that we can hopefully double the amount of circularity. Ian, going back to Scotland, you just produced the Scottish Circular Gap Report. The numbers are not very high. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but let's not mention them here. But what are some key practical things that you are already seeing that could help to double it, or, well, let's say tenfold in Scotland, which is more promising, I hope?
Yes, indeed. I was just before I answer that question, if I make the question in the audience about targets. I know that when we did our work on material flows, which shows that an average person in Scotland consumes about 20 tons of material per year in terms of their share of the economy. I think there was certainly a report, I don't have it to hand, but from Europe, scientists reckoned 8 tons per person would be a much more sustainable level. So I guess that in terms of a target, you would argue for us 8 tons per person is what we're trying to get to, but we're well over double that, which is obviously the start reality of where we are. So clearly, the information that we're working on is really helping us, focus, as I said, going forward. I mean, one of the things is a bit of a standout for us is we have, Scottish Government have appointed a circular economy minister. Without doubt, this has helped galvanise increased interest and pace for a circular economy journey. She's just been in post just over a year now, both in terms of within government and bringing new stakeholders to the table. I think what's also key for us, that she's also the Minister for Green Skills and Biodiversity. So straight away, we see the connectedness between the circular economy and, biodiversity and the natural systems, and as well as, the kind of tackling inequality and bringing skills to the fore. And I don't think that can be overlooked. So for us, that is key. She is definitely, helping us drive the agenda and making sure there's greater integration across the three areas in terms of policy development, implementation. And I think, I've heard obviously other speakers talk about how those things are all part of the same picture. So forward thinking, again, it is about supporting the businesses. So we've created a bit of an ecosystem ourselves in terms of supporting the companies, but that needs to kind of scale up now, that ecosystem. We need to be really helping individual businesses, but collection of businesses across the supply chain to actually work in a much more collaborative way. We're seeing signs of that. I think we need to start thinking about what is the infrastructure we need, what are the support, whether that's funding, whether it's advice, whether it's collaborative spaces, whether it's knowledge exchange both within Scotland and with international partners. And again, I can't stress that enough, that that we're all on this journey, and we're all to some extent at the start of it, regardless of what nation we're in, and having that international engagement is so important. But the other thing, and it's been said by many of the speakers, is just remembering that this is a people thing. I think for us in Scotland, that has really shone through, that whether it's individuals and businesses or leaders in businesses. We have an inspiring story already in the session from your colleague on the sofa. But really, this is about people within business, but people, communities, and individual citizens taking part. So this isn't about the usual thing, what can we all do to support the economy? This is very much about how can the economy support individuals and citizens, and people really, and that's really where we're heading.
Thank you. And I think you can mention a couple of times broadening the ecosystem, getting the right stakeholders at the table, really focusing on that collaborative approach. Elisa, do you also recognize that from, you mentioned the circular economy action plans that you're making and facilitating as UNEP for Africa, South America, but perhaps also broader? Are there some industry collaborations that you perhaps also are very hopeful about you can share?
Dee, I'm very happy to do so, especially because it allows me to bring in the conversation an area, space, where we think that we could really be testing the opportunities to increase the ambition on circularity and use that as an example for other sectors and value chains. And what I'm referring to is the ongoing process of negotiation of an international legally binding instrument to address plastic pollution. And as you know, one of the underlying conversation is the extent to which sustainable consumption and production modes, including circularity, could really offer a step change in this space. And what has been particularly motivating in the context of that conversation is to see at the margins and in advance to the negotiation process, to see how collaboration across the plastic value chain, including with industry actors, has really been showing the opportunities for ambition. And in that space, we have been able to create over time an excellent collaboration with the colleagues at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the context of the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment that they are leading, and our organization is supporting really in terms of bringing in a strong industry voice in collaboration with the other actors of the plastic value chain, with more than 250 business players, signatories to this commitment, but particularly aligning behind a common vision, a common objective, and a clear set of coordinated actions that would enable all those stakeholders in the value chain to really help transforming the plastic economy. And doing so with a clear purpose of also being able to report and account on progress and show the impact that they are achieving in terms of reducing plastic pollution. And all of these is really very much bringing positive energy in the context of the ongoing process of negotiation, in the context of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee that had its first meeting at the end of November last year, and it's going to have its second meeting in May, most likely in the week of the 22nd of May in France, in Paris. And really those collaboration with these different actors of the value chain, and particularly industry, can give important signal on what is possible, what are the opportunity, where there is space for innovation, innovative business model, and how they can lead us to a more ambitious future. But also it can raise opportunities for other stakeholders that will need to chip in, come on board to create the right environment for this transformation to accelerate, happen at a higher pace. So indeed, there's a lot that we can learn from this process, and that could help us accelerate in other sectors and in other value chains.
Well, curious to see what the results will be later this year. And perhaps you can have a bit of a competition with Bert, whatever is announced first, the new technology coming from VEEV or from this, the second meeting. One question actually to you, Bert. I'm seeing some questions from the online audience. You mentioned that people are for you, it's very important. Do you have to convince people to work for you? It was specifically a question how to convince students to engage in their professional path toward the circular economy sector. Do you...
I really have the opinion that the young people you don't have to convince. The young people know. They're born in the circular economy. This is completely different. But I should say 18, 19. I already have 24, you have still to learn a lot. But let's say the children between 13 and 18, my experience is we have some of these people in our firm just to show. They have a lot of knowledge about everything, and they are very easy. We are opening our foundation to what we call eco education, and we make this thing separate, young people and elderly people, to make different programs for this one and different programs for that one, just to change the mentality. But if we think about it, how many firms are in the world? And if every firm should do what we are doing, we could change a lot from inside. And now we're going most of the time outside. And what's interesting is reading it, is doing it, and we don't really touch the people on the floor. And I think this is one of the most important things to change, that the entrepreneurs are acknowledging that they can change, and the best ideas come from the people on the floor. Believe me, this is the truth.
Well, I think we talked already quite a lot that we need new innovation, new business models, the entrepreneurial mindset. Ian, are you seeing some great examples in Scotland for new novel innovation startups, or which you think will conquer the world as well in 2023?
Conquer the world, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I would obviously recommend people to go to our website and look at some of the case studies that we have. I mean, I've already mentioned, obviously, a big focus for us on the low carbon infrastructure, renewables. So yeah, we're working with a range of organisations there. Renewable parts, which is very much looking at how do you repair and remanufacture technology within sort of wind turbines, for instance, so not so much the blades. We are working with companies who are looking at repurposing that infrastructure, but the kind of mechanisms inside, how do you ensure that we, as we start to power up and build bigger wind turbines in Scotland, that we're not just throwing all the parts away. How can you refurbish that technology? Also linked to that is a specific company in the south of Scotland looking at, it's a data-driven company, so it's using AI technology to monitor the performance of renewable infrastructure, and it's the conditional performance, so thinking about the condition of the materials and the products that are being utilised within that infrastructure, so they can arrange preventative maintenance rather than simply schedule things in like on a regular basis. So one, that's improving the performance and thinking differently about, how we can maximise the maintenance schedule to reduce things being worn out, etc. But also they're using that information, that data to kind of in terms of the design of future component parts that are going into some of that technology. So I'm sure, all of this is really thinking about the future, so we don't end up with lots of infrastructure, which we desperately need in terms of renewables, in terms of wind, in terms of wave, but ultimately we don't want to see that thrown in the scrap heap in 20, 25 years as technology advances again and we repower all of that equipment, which is very much, I guess, what's happened in the past. So I think that for us, whilst we're working with a number of businesses who are thinking about, what's currently the opportunities in terms of the waste space, so to speak, and the recycling space at the moment, but it's very much the focus for us is in that future space, and how do we work with those individuals, entrepreneurs, and spin-offs perhaps from university, but more importantly, get into the design parts of universities and colleges, and trying to understand what does the future look like, what is our future demand potentially going to be in terms of resources, and how can we ensure that demand is not going to be as resource intensive as it is at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you really touch upon a couple of those strategies that were mentioned in the report as well. So make sure that you design for recycling so you can cycle it at the end, which I think if you look back all those years from windmills that are currently on land, which coming at the end of life now, which wasn't really part of the thinking 25 years ago. And I think it's a clear example how we need to be smarter about this. And the predictive maintenance, use longer, I think also one of the key for circular strategies. A question online is actually focusing on the other two parts of the four strategies, so the narrow and the use less. So perhaps, Matthew, if you have any insights to that, are there any particular solutions in the report to the role of the financial sector and the governments, particularly towards those two, the very first two strategies?
Yeah, I think it's clearly there is a role. I think it's it can be quite complex, and clearly we need to look at how to make better incentives. I think obviously Lakshmi gave the great and very tangible example of cycling here in the Netherlands, but a bike costs you, on the street at least, no more than 50 euros. Repairing it costs no more than 10 euros a year. It's healthier for you. It's by far the quickest way to get around the city. And I think what you see now is actually a lot of cities, I've worked in for cities many years, massively going after sort of cycle-first infrastructure. I mean, this is a huge trend that's happening sort of across Europe at least, and certainly in North America as well. So I think to the extent that financial incentives can make things easier and cheaper for people, that's clearly a role. But perhaps also the other panelists have a note to chime in on.
I lived in Austin, Texas for a year. I can tell you, cycling, then you were the odd one out. Walking was really impossible almost. So very happy when we moved back to Amsterdam, and it's my first cycle in the rain. I thought, I'm back home. I'm just looking. I think we're almost at a time. I'm just giving a few more minutes. So perhaps comments from one of the other panelists, especially on the role that the government can play in the incentives.
I'm happy to come in, Dee, if I may.
Yes, please.
Because I think that this is definitely one of the key instruments that will help us to transform the economy. As we are interacting with businesses, and particularly small and medium-sized enterprises across the globe, and we're working with them to transform their business models to reflect more the circularity of the economy. What we are confronted with in many instances is that it actually is for them more expensive or less economically viable to shift towards circularity. So it is very much in the hands of those who are setting our incentives to ensure that the incentives are right for circularity and do not favor the traditional solutions, but open the floor to prioritize more sustainable and more circular opportunities. We do know of several businesses, particularly in the difficult years that we have been experiencing in the past 2 or 3 years, that actually really had a challenge to remain open and remain on business when their business model was focusing very much on repairing, recycling, because simply their margins on the price were way too slim to remain in business. So it is definitely one of the central efforts that need to be done. And I believe that a lot of the ground can be achieved if we do see the transition to circularity more as a whole of the economy transformation. We do still experience a lot that the circular economy agenda is very much perceived as an environment agenda, and in fewer instances in the hands of economic development ministers, finance ministers, planning ministers, or trade and industry ministers. So unless we change that narrative and we bring this agenda into more of a comprehensive sustainable development narrative globally, it might be difficult for the transition to circularity to really flourish and come to the right scale. And we might be more in the hands of the front runners to bring that transformation forward.
Does this also include the true price concept? So we're really including the externalities of the pricing into the actual commercial price. I see Ian nodding as well online. Any developments that you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think the other thing is that the government, I mean, there's a role definitely for fiscal stimuli and, also thinking about regulations perhaps to kind of incentivize to take up a circular economy, but they also have a role to simply things like public procurement, realigning the public procurement around circular business models and thinking about the kind of life cycle impact of products, so just changing their approach. It's not, I don't think it's all about, the funding, the finances itself. I think there's lots of things that they could do as governments. I also think it's how creative they can be in that kind of support phase around, new startup businesses or incentivizing, innovation, supporting innovation in the space as well. So I think there's a lot that government can do to incentivize the circular economy. But I think the other thing is, even just listening again to today, being part of it, in terms of the global picture that's going on, listening to colleagues around the panel, the circular economy is happening. It is happening. And okay, we might suggest it's not going at the pace that we'd like it to go at, or it needs to go at in terms of tackling climate change and tackling global inequality, but it's going to happen. I think there's an onus now of governments, to get on board and really understand how they can maximise the opportunities, not just economically, but socially for the citizens in their particular country. That's where we should be focusing our efforts, that this is not it's not a trend, it's not a fad, it's not something that's a kind of nice to have. You might want to do this, but you might not. This is happening. This is a global shift that we are seeing, and I think it's just really, acknowledgement of governments now to how do they engage with it, how do they get on board, and also just, there's lots of, obviously we know the benefits, we can talk about the benefits, we can talk the downsides of it not being, not going circular, but ultimately governments now have to think about how do they, and I think somebody's already said this, what are the inputs, what are the things that they need to put in place to make this go faster, accelerate more, and have more impact at their level in terms of the citizens that they're responsible for. So it's actually part of that kind of, they're really having that impact both locally and nationally and internationally that we're all going to try and get, well, what we are all getting behind now. I think that's really a key focus for us.
Bertus, do you recognize from your experience within VIV also that the government is playing an active role in Poland to help stimulate the circular economy, or
yes,
have you been successful despite all of that?
No, we got our help, of course. We always, for example, the financing for the Polish government is our laboratorium to study all the things we do with the composite, and this helps, of course, a lot. And even 2 machines we bought now, we get also through the European community, and we have some projects going on. Of course, we also try to get this help to make it scaling. I mean, the business is payable. This is not a problem, but the scaling is most of the time the problem. Is to make the scale, you need a lot of investment, and here you can use the help, of course, to make this quicker. But our model is payable as a business model.
Okay, very clear. I understand we have time for a few more questions also from the audience, so I'm getting there's one.
Thank you. We've had a lot about new business models and innovation, which is a clear opportunity of the circular economy. And I was also really pleased to hear Elisa highlight the role of the informal sector. We know it's the biggest employer in the world, in fact. And they also exist in countries where there's a lot of existing circular practice, where circular economy is completely commonplace, the grow and the build countries. And I wondered if the panel, but perhaps Elisa from the work on plastics and how that's progressed, if there are any learnings about how to bring these groups into these discussions more and really learn from existing practice that is happening in continents like Latin America and Africa, the wealth of experience the informal sector holds.
Dee, may I come in directly?
Yes, of course. Please go ahead.
So it's really very interesting what you're asking, because when we started the process of negotiation of an instrument to address plastic pollution, we were coming with a very similar question as the one you were asking on how to bring those voices in the discussion and how to make sure that we could build together solutions that were relevant to everybody. And what was extremely interesting to see as this process was unfolding is that actually different representatives from the informal sector came together and created a global group, a global associations where they came together and organized themselves to bring their experience, their expectations, but also bring some initial thoughts on how they could work in the context of the transformation of the plastics economy into a more circular one, and bringing in the perspectives of different companies of how they have been coming together with and collaborated with the EPR mechanism, extended producer responsibilities mechanism that were in place in a number of countries, and how they could establish a collaboration with the organization that is leading those mechanisms, as well as in certain contexts, how one could take advantage, for example, of sustainable public procurement practices and target procurement decision, particularly to more vulnerable groups that need specific processes and attention to be able to be retained as a protagonist in the economy. It's, however, a conversation that is very much in early stages, and we are learning also from the exchange of experiences that are happening in different regions. There are representatives from Latin America in the discussion, representative from Asia and from Africa, and all of them are coming with a richness of different approaches that would definitely provide food for thought for the negotiators that are in the process of shaping that global instrument. But indeed, what proved interesting is that they really stepped up to the challenge and organized themselves to be part of these international intergovernmental negotiation.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear, and it really shows if people get together and everyone can move within their own company to make this happen, which is also a question from the audience. What can people do, both here in the room but online, to take a step towards a circular world. And perhaps that's a question for all of you, and you can give your final tip lesson within a few words. Sharon, okay, what are the key thing that you would like the audience to go home with today? Perhaps starting with you, Bertus.
I think I already told this, and I will repeat it all the time. If we don't change the mentality of ourselves, we will never change anything. And of course, the rules and to say we have to do it is a nice word. It's only a word. And I think we all the time have to think about how to change the people, how to educate the people, but education from things which has really impact on the people. So practical education. I don't like theoretical education, which doesn't help. But if you go to the schools, for example, you have such a school in Warsaw with they do already they call it the school of the 21st century, and they go to the practical things and they show the children the practical things. And I think this is the good way to do it, to show that we really have a problem. And I have the feeling sometimes that we talk of the problem many years, and we talk with the same people all the time. And I think we have to increase the amount of listeners. That's my advice.
So educate yourself and act on it.
And to give the example, of course.
Matthew?
Yeah, well, I think actually building very much on what you're saying, I mean, the opportunity is unbelievably clear. I mean, we all have a common goal, sort of well-being within planetary boundaries. How to get there is definitely requiring significant amounts of system change, but there are a variety of perspectives, environmental perspectives, economic perspectives, social. I mean, this is a problem for everybody to work on. Get involved, get engaged.
Okay. Ian or Elisa, a few words from you to add. What should the audience do from today onward?
Okay, shall I go first? I mean, I think others have said it. I mean, when I'm asked that question, obviously this is about consumption. So on a practical level, I think we all just need to think about what we're consuming, whether that's what we buy and we're not using. So it's not the food, and trying to reduce food waste, textiles, clothing, things that the obvious things. We really do need to start thinking about that. But the other thing, in a more general sense, is talk about this. This has to be something. I don't think when we talk about climate change, the obvious conversations around flying, energy, electric vehicles, all of those types of conversations are what people talk about. But let's start talking about consumption. Let's talk about and the positive ways that we can address it, whether that's reuse, repair, second-hand clothing, shopping differently, servitization opportunities. That's what we really need people to start doing. To talk about it with your family, with your friends, with your neighbours, and in a positive way that this is something that not just needs to be done, it is something that is happening now, and there are now trends in terms of buying differently, purchasing differently, across our wider economy. So it is about just talking about it openly and getting engaged, as Matthew said.
Great, Elisa, from your end.
I'll second what Ian was mentioning, particularly around the point of being positive. So we know that there's a world of possibilities in which we can all contribute to circularity. It's important that we all feel that we are part of the solution and that we're shown how we can positively contribute to that and how this is good for us and for the others. So going into the lines of really showing that there is this world of possibilities.
I really like that indeed. For me also, circularity is a very tangible and possible way that we can help to address the overshoot of the planetary boundaries. So thank you everyone for your sharing your experiences and the conversation we just had. I feel everyone can just talk for hours on this, but unfortunately this is the time we have for today. Thanks everyone, and I'm really looking forward to seeing whatever you've learned today, how everyone will put that in practice and start changing the world for 2023. Over to Hattie for some final words.
Yes, so I think I have the luxury of closing today. So let us end where we began, with that one fundamental but not so simple question. Through a circular economy, are we able to fulfill the well-being of our expanding population within the safe boundaries of our planet? I think it's clear from the past hour and a half that we can, that we have the evidence, we have the solutions, we have the people, we are all part of that solution. So now it is up to all of us, as individuals, as businesses,